Cherrystone Harbor, South Carolina, 1862. In the early morning hours, under a blanket of fog and darkness,
a man named Robert Smalls is taking a daring escape from slavery. Smalls had been forced to work as pilot on a prized Confederate Navy ship called the CSS Planter. That night, all of the white officers on the ship had decided to spend the night on shore with their families.
this created an enticing and dangerous opportunity for escape.
At this time, the American Civil War had been raging for a year and Union forces had blockaded entry and exit from Charleston. The city and its port were a crucial lifeline for Confederate forces in the South. While the blockade was a burden for the Confederacy, it meant that freedom for Robert was just on the other side of the harbor.
Because of slavery, he knew that his family could be separated for him in an instant. He knew that they could be sold away or he could be sold away. And like any father who loved his family, loved his wife, loved his children, he tried to think of a way that he could protect his family.
Robert devised a cunning plan, commandeered the ship, get his family on board and use the cover of night to sail straight out the front door of Charleston to freedom.
At any place along this way, had things gone wrong, it would have been tragic at that point in time because of runaways and because they were on their war footing. There were always patrols. He came up with a plan to, in the middle of the night, put on the top hat and overcoat of a Confederate captain on the ship Whistle to get past the various forts in Cherrystone Harbor.
They had managed to traverse the harbor unharassed, but the last hurdle they had to face before freedom was the most dangerous. They had to check in at the fearsome Fort Sumter, a massive military fortress at the entrance to the harbor. He stood in a specific place on the boat that didn't bring any type of suspicion to him, which allowed him navigate at that point beyond the guns of Fort Sumter. However, once outside the harbor, they faced a new threat. They were piloting a Confederate warship heading straight for Union forces.
It was an enormous surprise to the United States soldiers who were stationed on the ship this to see, first of all, one of the largest Confederate boats steaming towards them. With this enormous Confederate flag, Robert had thought of all the details of how to get to freedom and was just about there. He was on the precipice of freedom, but had forgotten a detail that could have gotten them blown out of the water. But likely my great-great-grandmother Hannah Ann remembered to sew together a number of white sheets, and so they quickly lowered to Confederate flag and raised the white sheets of surrender and sailed up toward the USS Onward.
After arriving to the north, Robert had hailed as a hero for his exploits. Newspapers wrote about him and he was even awarded prize money for bringing the planter to the north.
He could have lived a very comfortable life as a Civil War hero up in the north, but the same dream that he had for himself to be free, he then went back and fought for others like him.
After the war and in the end of slavery, Robert returned to his native Beaufort, South Carolina and used some of his prize money to purchase a former slave master's house. He became a prominent businessman and started participating in politics. He was one of the founders of the South Carolina Republican Party and was elected as the first black member of the House of Representatives of South Carolina and later the United States. One of the first things that you see is that in 1868 he is involved in writing a new constitution for the state of South Carolina.
He actually wrote the legislation that created the first free compulsory statewide public school system in America.
During his political tenure, he was steadfast in advocating for expanded social services and civil rights. Robert served 5 terms as a congressman in Washington and was often the target of concerted campaigns designed to curb African American representation in politics. As a result of political wrangling in the Reconstruction period, many protections gained by recently emancipated African Americans were rolled back.
The black folks basically went back to positions of almost complete servitude. They became non-citizens, they could not vote.
Despite Small's marginalization in his later life, his story is one of the most profound in the history of African American emancipation and American democracy as a whole. It makes you think about the gains that he advocated for and the challenges that he faced. And African Americans had to overcome to have a lieutenant governor of the state of South Carolina who was African American, to have member of Congress in South Carolina who were African Americans.
At the same time, I think the fact that many of the gains that Robert fought so hard for were taken away at the end, I think that is the perfect illustration of the fact that people of goodwill have to be steadfast.